For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
.706 on today's Entrepreneur. Welcome to this program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, along with Fuller Landau's Josh Miller. Good evening, Josh.
Hello, Dan.
And this evening on the program, we'll be chatting with Carolyn De Luca of Delfab.
Delfab, they're in the textile business, but they focus on the healthcare industry. So all those scrubs and all that stuff that you see on that hopefully not too many people see, but all too many people see on the doctors and nurses, that's part of their focus. Not all their focus, but half their focus.
Interesting. So she is coming up. But first, as usual, some entrepreneurial news of the day. And I thought we'd start off by talking a little bit about celebrity endorsements and whether or not they work. We never chatted about this in the program, and I figured this story is kind of fun. Blue Jay star Jose Bautista, this is from the Globe and Mail, is going to be a spokesperson for Cinnamon Toast Crunch and Golden Grahams and some other cereals in the General Mills family. What do you think? Do these kind of, we remember back in the day, we had the Wheaties boxes and everything. Do these kind of celebrity endorsements still work?
The Bruce/Caitlyn Jenner, the cereals and all those advertisements, absolutely. The question is, do you have a budget for it? We deal with a lot of entrepreneurs. We don't necessarily deal with all these large multinational companies. The question is, can you afford it? There's no question that if you have the right celebrity, you can absolutely build your brand to an nth degree. It would be great to have, a Georges St-Pierre emphasize any Quebec brand, because he's such a great name and a well-known, well-recognized name. The question is, what would he charge? What would all these celebrities charge so that you can get your brand out there? I think it's a dollars and cents question. When you're dealing with Post and Kellogg and these large companies that are selling these Cinnamon Toast Crunch, I think their budgets for marketing are quite large. The question is, when you're an entrepreneur and you have a limited amount of marketing resources, what do? Celebrities, while great, are not necessarily always the most economical. So do you have to find a rising star and say, hey, you know what, he's cheap now or she's cheap now, and kind of roll with it? Maybe so in an entrepreneurial world.
Not to mention the fact that sometimes celebrities misbehave, and sometimes that's not the best thing for your brand too. We've seen this a lot in sports as well. Celebrities getting caught, or sports stars getting caught using performance-enhancing substances. We saw this during the NFL draft, of course. That video of one draft prospect came out when he was smoking something on camera.
Yeah, you have to be ready for it. I mean, even if you had, New England Patriots, Deflategate. And you have Tom Brady as your sponsor, but yet he's involved in this supposed or this literal scandal of Deflategate. He's still a great name, and he still endorses a great product because it's such an unknown. Like I'm sure you're going to talk about later. If you had PKP, if you had Pierre Carpelado out there endorsing your brand, and he's out there, he's getting divorced, he's not running for office anymore. It's still a name that could work for you. The question is, what's the return on investment? Do the dollars that you invest really return the sales and revenue that you expect?
Finally, also in Ontario, a few cities now calling on the province to ban door-to-door sales for a bunch of reasons. One, they say the most important, the most crucial, is they say that sometimes the practice can victimize vulnerable people. But in general, what do you think about the tactic of not only going door-to-door, but even calling people up at their home and during supper time? Do these sales tactics work anymore?
For me, no. It's honestly as simple as that. The number of times that we get called during dinner or even afterwards, whether my wife, it's my kids, whatever, and they say, we got called at 6, at 7. They say, okay, no, Mr. Miller's not home, call back later. And then they call back later, and then we answer. And then they come back and they say, you know what? I even answer sometimes and say, don't call me back. And they still do. So the question is, be respectful of the ultimate consumer. If you really anger them, if you piss them off, well, then you're not going to get any business later on. So are people home at dinner time? Are they able to answer the phone? Yes. But is it the best time to call them? I'm not so convinced. With all these call centers around the world, there must be better times to call. There must be times during the day at the office, at work. There must be ways to get different phone numbers that you can call them and not disturb the family time. Don't disturb the family time, and you're good to go.
And eventually, maybe one day we'll have a conversation about email, and maybe that will become too invasive. But for now, I guess anything goes via email.
Well, until you have junk mail and you can spam it, you don't necessarily have to return it, and you can sift through all the junk mail, what have you. I think that might not be as direct, because I do believe the talking, the in-person, can never be replaced. But of course, if you're limited, then you have to resort to email.
This is a very cool idea. Different kind of car sharing company, Turo, this peer-to-peer car rental company, launching in 3 provinces, including Quebec.
With all the hype and all the hullabaloo about Uber, and certainly in Quebec, and getting pulled over and cars impounded, and trying to find an economical way to travel, no question that this car rental sharing app had to come to pass. Everybody rents from these car rental sharing companies, the Avises and the Budgets and the Nationals and the Hertzes and all that. The question is, so many of our cars sit idle so much of the time. How much can you get out of it, or what is the market out there to get your own car out there? Of course, then there's the question of insurance. There's no doubt about it. If you're going to rent your car out to a third party, will your insurance cover you if there's an accident? I think that's really the hiccup behind all this. Now, there are certain companies out there that are covering it, the Bel Airs of the world. There's no question that there's a market out there, and for the smart insurance companies, they're going to cover things that they're not used to, that they're not accustomed to, but that's absolutely out there. The question is, as a consumer, if you're going to rent out your car, you better make sure you're covered, because that accident's coming sooner or later.
I love the story. This, fashion is obviously adapting with the times, and now we have a company that is specializing in accessible clothing.
Accessible clothing. What does accessible clothing mean? This article that I read was actually, I was really endeared to it. I was fascinated by it because it was accessible clothing to handicapped individuals. Whether you're in a wheelchair, whether you're too short, too small, too fat, too large, and not because of dietary issues, not like me, of course, Dan, but of course because of genetics, and that you have some limbs that are different, or some size issues, or whatever have you. There are companies out there. This particular company is catering to the handicapped. We talk about social responsibility a lot. This company, social responsibility, plus doing something that it can be profitable for something else. I think that's a win-win for everybody.
Leon's Furniture is sort of adapting to the social media era.
Furniture companies, they're tough. I mean, there's so much competition. The logistics and the amount of inventory they have to carry is huge. How do they stay in front of the customer? Customers aren't walking into the stores all the time. They, when you buy a couch, when you buy a dining room table, you're not buying one every month. You're not buying one every year. You're buying one every 5 years, every 10 years, every 15 years. How do you stay in front of the customer so they go in front of you? In this particular case, Leon said, you know what? I know they got to come and they got to feel the furniture and they got to test the fabric and all that, but at least let them see the look. Let the millennials that love this disposable issues, this disposable product, let them at least see what it looks like. And then through an Instagram program, say, hey, that looks awesome. Let me walk into that store. We always talk about retailers and the why of walking into the store. Instagram and the creation and the pictorials that they create that reason why people should walk into that store.
Today's Entrepreneur on CJAD 800. We'll chat with Carolyn De Luca of Delfab coming up in just a couple of minutes on the program.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Coming up to 7:20 on today's Entrepreneur, inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Dan Delmar and FL Fuller Landau's Josh Miller with you. And Josh, this evening we're joined by Carolyn De Luca of Delfab. Carolyn, welcome to CJAD.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So first question, always the easiest. Tell us about yourself and about Delfab.
So Delfab is a company that's been around for 40 years. We are importers of textile-based products. I guess that's very broad to say. If I were to focus it down, I would say we are importing healthcare textiles, items that you would find in hospitals and long-term care facilities. And we touch institutional textiles as well. And we do some items for retail. And I'm the sales director of the business. It's family owned.
Now, you said this business has been around for 40 years. Clearly, you have not been around for 40 years. I know it's radio, nobody can see, but you're rather youthful looking. Not as youthful looking as Dan, perhaps, but pretty darn close. And so when did you, this is a family business, so did you live, eat, breathe this business as you were growing up?
To a certain degree, I would say yes. There was never a pressure to join, but I did get to spend some summers working with my father, and I did spend a lot of time in the office on days off from school, and I really enjoyed what I saw. So when I was in university, originally I thought I'd be going off and doing something else with my life, and as the years came to a close, I said, this seems like something I want to do. So it was actually a bit of a surprise when I turned around to my father and I said I wanted to join the business. But with the experience that I had leading up to it, and he saw that I had a flair for what we did, he was encouraging of the fact that I wanted to join.
Did you ever think that maybe you should gain experience in another company, in some different environment before actually starting outright in the family business?
There was that decision-making process. When I graduated in 2009, the recession had just hit us pretty hard. Lehman Brothers had went bust. And everyone in my graduating year with an undergrad degree was looking at call center jobs, if you were looking at anything in banking or finance or HR. And I did. I considered it seriously. I really wanted to work with people, so I was considering human relations. But at that point, I figured, why spend the next few years doing something that won't allow me to learn, won't allow me to practice when what ultimately I do want to try? So why delay the process a decade when I can just get in there and get my feet wet and, hit the ground running?
Now, you're talking about you were in the healthcare field from a textile standpoint.
Yes.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, there's different parts of textiles in the healthcare field. There's what people would consider smart textiles, or very sophisticated textiles that are used in treating people. We're more in the commodity-based sector, which is linens,
Scrubs.
patient
That's what people
wear.
hear. They see the sitcom, they hear everything. It's scrubs.
It's scrubs. It's doctor scrubs. It's patient linens. It's what you're lying on when you go to the hospital. When you're cold, you get the extra blanket. We're the supplier of that blanket. So that's what healthcare textiles is on a very broad level.
We all need it eventually. Carolyn De Luca of Delfab joining us this evening on Today's Entrepreneur. More in just a moment.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:25 on CJD 800. This evening on Today's Entrepreneur, we're joined by Carolyn De Luca of Delfab. They do textiles for the healthcare sector. How is it, Carolyn, dealing with governments and those kinds of organizations?
Well, it's interesting. It's taken us the better part. We forayed into the healthcare industry probably about 10 years ago at a wholesale level, where we were selling to people who may be even considered some of our competitors now, who are buying from us in bulk. They were looking for importers, and we provided that service because they didn't know how to do that themselves. But then dealing with the government became something that we looked at because we wanted to go to the end user directly. And there was a lot of red tape. There was standards to follow, protocol to implement at work. It was challenging, but not impossible. And I would say, like I said, it was a challenge, but not too hard, and we had a good time doing it.
Did you have to get involved in now more of the tendering process with public institutions?
Yes, we did. That's the main process of purchasing, at least in Quebec, a little bit so in the rest of Canada as well, but it's a call to tender. So if you're supplying these hospitals in this province, you have to be chosen by the government body. So there are buying groups that are in place that have standards for the products we sell. We have to abide by those standards. We get tested, and then if you're price competitive and if your product meets quality control, you are then chosen to supply for the next few years.
Big learning curve? I mean, you guys didn't always do this. You didn't always deal with the government. So is it a big learning curve with this, as I said, tendering process before?
A huge learning curve. I mean, our customers before were seasonal, and we created new product for them on a monthly basis, and we were looking at changing every 6 months. And now it became, how do you implement production of something that has to be to spec every single time? You can't have a mistake, otherwise you're dealing with the consequences of the fact that these are patients using your product. And so definitely a huge learning curve.
Now you're buying your product. You're from where?
So we're importing mostly from Pakistan, India, China. Those would be the three major players for that typical industry, because we're looking at commodity-based products that have to be price competitive.
Now, as you're going through this tendering process, and I'm just trying to follow the logic here, is you're trying to get the best price. You're trying to put in the best tender. You need to have the right quality product, because there are certain minimums or factors or parameters that you have to follow.
Absolutely.
How strict do you have to be with your suppliers, and how much does that come into play when selecting your suppliers and dealing with them?
Absolutely. I mean, anyone can go out to a tender and say, I have the best price. And then when it comes to actually producing and shipping the product, what you're getting on your doorstep is not at all what you're actually expecting to receive. So we have to have strict quality control practices in place. We do a lot of sampling before we even choose a supplier. We don't always have only one supplier per product. We make sure we have alternative sources. So in the event of problems just with timing, or in terms of production load, lead times, we have to be able to source elsewhere, because we can't have back orders. You're penalized for that kind of thing.
Do you ever have to fly in product?
It happens. It's extremely expensive to do so.
That's what everybody says.
No one likes to do it, but it has to happen if you're servicing your client and you want to make sure you get them the product on time.
Now, you talk about quality control.
Mm-hmm.
How much is in Canada versus on the ground overseas?
It's, I would say, a 50% in both places. I mean, what we're talking about is we have people who work as either third-party quality control or people under our employ that we have asked to do that, we're paying to do this service for us. So they're dealing with, at a macro level, the production process, looking that everything goes smoothly. But once it comes here, we're going into the detailed analysis with local facilities like CTT.
Are these quality control people that are overseas? Have they been with you a long time? Are they tough to find?
They're tough to find. It's tough to find good ones. We've been dealing with some of the same factories for some of them for over 25 years now, and those are the relationships we would like to encourage, and that's where we like to give our business, because those are the people you can trust. With inventions like Alibaba, for example, which is a big importing website, importers around will understand what I'm saying. Anyone will say, I can produce this product for you, but at the end of the day, you have such an inconsistency in quality control that's not who you want to do business with.
And there's no doubt that people on the ground overseas is hugely important. We'll continue to talk. It's absolutely fascinating always in dealing with overseas. And when we come back from the break, we'll chat a little bit more about that.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:36 on today's Entrepreneur, a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, along with FL Fuller Landau's Josh Miller, and our guest tonight is Carolyn De Luca of Delfab. They make textile products for the healthcare sector, and it's a pretty interesting area, Josh, especially when you have to sort of deal with not only suppliers overseas, but come back here and deal with some very stringent government standards.
Question, but as Carolyn was saying before, dealing with China and Pakistan, Bangladesh, was there an easier country to do business with, harder? Do you find it all the same? I know there's quality control issues and there's people on the ground issues. Did you find that one country was just easier or harder than the other?
I would say they all have their specialties in terms of what they do. So if you go to that country for the product they are known for, you shouldn't have too many issues. We've had issues when it's come to finalized products, finished products for the textile industry. We see that it's a little easier sometimes to bring in raw merchandise, raw fabric, which would come from Pakistan. The products where we have a little bit more trouble, sometimes we would see from China, because they have a little bit of a more finished element to them.
it really depends on the country and who you have on the ground,
Exactly.
but you really, bottom line is, you gotta take control. You gotta be on the ground. You gotta figure out, like you said, there's quality control that was half here in Canada,
Right.
and half there. You got to make sure that 100%, whatever's here and there, is really, really working out.
Exactly.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Marketing. You said, I think you mentioned earlier that you weren't always fully or, in the healthcare as much as you were. You had a transition.
Mm-hmm.
Where was that switching point?
The switching point came, like I said, about a decade ago when we realized we were very strong in fashion before. And we realized that with the way the tariffs had changed in this country and importing became so much easier, it was harder and harder for manufacturers locally who were buying fabric from us to do business with us. So we started to look to other areas. And that's when that switch happened, because healthcare came with a product that was something we can do consistently.
So diversification.
Exactly.
You couldn't stay in the one area. You kind of reinvented yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It was a total reinvention. We were doing products for Missy clothing before. It was fabric that was printed. It was 100% cotton. And now you're going into an area where you're dealing with polyesters and different compositions of fabric. And before you're bringing in rolls of fabric, and now you're bringing in a finished garment.
Is it a question of competition? Did you have more competition before when you were in fashion, a little bit less in healthcare, or does it still exist today?
What's interesting is that the people who were doing fashion or that kind of textile product in Montreal before were also looking for different areas to do business. So we've seen a few of them switch over to healthcare as well. There is a lot of competition in this province when it comes to healthcare textiles, but the tendering process kind of weeds out the people who can't necessarily do it properly or don't have the means in place to really get to that market.
Would you say it's a barrier of entry? I mean, barrier to entry, if you're in the textile business, you want to start selling to these large hospital institutions or whatever government institutions,
Mm-hmm.
would you say if you don't have that knowledge, that tendering knowledge, what it takes to produce the right uniform or
Mm-hmm.
the right textile, is that a big learning curve?
Definitely. It took us quite a bit of time. The reason it took us the better part of 10 years before we started really going direct was because we had to teach ourselves that process. So we had to learn the product first to make sure we got it right, because there was no mistake that once you went into the tendering process, if you didn't go in with the right item, you would have issues being selected. So we had to get the product right first, and then we had to go in at a small level, start going direct to people who could purchase from us directly and who weren't covered by the red tape of this province, and then start hitting the tenders once we knew what we were doing.
You are in a family business, and as family businesses, Dan, as we've spoken with many entrepreneurs before, there's a transition issue. There's the father, mother, daughter, son, granddaughter, grandson that comes about. How is that transition for you, or how is that? Because I know it's still ongoing.
Yes.
You're still youthful at heart, as both Dan and I are, no doubt, even though both of you are younger than me. But that's besides the point right now on radio. Nobody can see. But the question is, from a transition standpoint and from a role standpoint, how do you, and I believe your father that started this or is heavily involved in this, how does that play in your roles?
The understanding is it's easy for us because there's a mutual understanding. He is in charge. I am here to learn because he wants to encourage me.
Are you good with that?
I am. I think that's actually, it's been the best education I've ever had. I've been paid to go to school for the past 7 years. He's a wonderful mentor, and there's no need for me to prove that I can do better. He wants me to do better. So there's that constant encouragement. He's very open to my ideas. He really... there's no words sometimes to describe the fact of how lucky I am because of that fact that it's very easy going between us. He treats me like an equal.
Do you think you have different styles, or do you share the same style of running a company?
We do have different styles if you're looking from the outside in, but fundamentally we usually end up meeting at the same point. His is probably just a little bit more, there's a bit more wisdom to it. There's a bit more caution. He has more experience and seen things that
He might have grayer hair, shorter hair, grayer hair.
I can just dye mine, that's the difference.
Cut it too, The curves might have to be in a different spaces, but that's okay.
But, the difference just being that I would probably be a little bit more impatient where he would proceed with caution. So it's a good mechanism in place for him to kind of calm me down when I'm trying to... That's
actually a really interesting aspect. Do you find that sometimes because you're so eager, you want to jump too early?
Definitely. Sometimes I would jump and fall flat on my face if he wasn't there to really put the hold on and say, well, think it through. So he definitely, it's great having him around. I hope he doesn't go anywhere anytime soon.
He's listening. I'm sure he won't go anywhere. Now there must also be, a team around you, small or large. How much do you rely on the people around you as well?
We're a well-oiled machine. If there's one person missing in small business, it affects operations completely. We're a small amount of people in the office, but we also depend very strongly on the agents and the salespeople that are not under our direct employ, but who work as agents for us. We need them because without them, we wouldn't be able to do what we do.
You were talking about competition before, and how that certainly with the change and getting into that healthcare sector. Is there certain marketing issues that you face? How do you get your name out there? How do you make sure that you're recognized?
It's interesting because in a world that's so modern with IT and websites and advertising, textiles is an industry where it's still word of mouth, it's reference, it's knocking on doors. I spent a lot of my first years just making cold calls and showing up at trade shows, making those in-person connections and shaking hands. And the idea being word of mouth. You do well with one customer, it's an industry. They'll refer you to their friend who's doing the same thing at the next hospital or the next laundry. So
Does that mean you don't feel you have to do some specific outward marketing website and all that?
There is that consideration, and it's something that we're looking for towards in the future of how we can implement that and actually get a return on that investment. But it's difficult to see because we're not really an e-commerce type of business. We're selling items in bulk, and we're selling something that's pre-standardized, right? So there's not much I can necessarily say except for my servicing tactics when it comes to marketing. And that's usually what we push, is how we can offer a customized service.
Carolyn De Luca joins us from Delfab this evening. In a few minutes, we'll hear her one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur. But next, we'll have Kevin Ammerman, IT specialist, talk about mergers, demergers, bringing companies together, and then bringing that IT aspect together as well.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Coming up to 7:50 on today's Entrepreneur, inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Dan Delmar and FL Fuller Landau's Josh Miller with you. Our guest this evening, Carolyn De Luca of Delfab. We'll have her one piece of advice for today's Entrepreneur on the way. But first, joining us again is Kevin Ammerman, IT specialist with FL. And Kevin, thanks for joining us again. And we're here to talk about not only mergers and demergers, but sort of the back end of that and how that can affect your IT systems and even the small details, like for example, email signatures. Details like that are important to put into place when you merge companies, I guess. And I've had to change many signatures over the years, and those little details are important for company's image.
Exactly. So these little details, they carry on, and it really helps to sort of sit down in advance and take it seriously, to look at the costs of what merging or demerging is going to be for your company. So not only the signatures and the little technical details like that, but the bigger pieces like the value of the software and the licensing that the company that you're merging with. Like, what do they actually have on hand? Does it match up with sort of what you're expecting and what you're using in your own environment? And trying to figure out, first of all, the straight up licensing cost, how much you're going to have to pay to bring new people on board. And secondly, how are you going to integrate those systems?
I think the matching is actually kind of key. You have a couple of companies that want to merge, and whether one is Microsoft based and one is Mac based or whatever softwares you have in, you really do have to plan. What if it is a Mac based versus a PC based system? Does one take over? Is it a question of discussing it and figuring out which softwares are most important? How does that work in that kind of merger?
It's really, really a good question, because sometimes you'll have the same product, but you'll have very different paths to get there. So trying to look at the culture, the way that the people are using the software. Are they using specific tools that really only work on one platform or another? Or are they using specific software? So, for example, it hasn't been too long that even something as simple as Microsoft Word simply has not worked on Macs very well. And it's only recently that things are sort of starting to come together and bring those worlds together. So if you look at design, or if you look at even accounting, it's pretty tough to find a decent accounting software that runs on a Mac these days. And and from the other end, from the graphics world, there were a lot of tools available on Apple computers that weren't available on PCs until pretty recently. So as I say, recently it's starting to come together a little bit more. But when it comes time to sort of look at how your business fits with another business, you really have to look close at those softwares and the processes and the way that you get the job done.
What about the compatibility of the hardware between, again, we're talking about a merger and two separate locations and two separate hardwares. And of course the software has to come into it. And I'm talking like almost like I sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I really don't. I'm just really going to a question of when you're in two different locations and the mergers and it's really two different sets of equipment, how big are the challenges? What do the people have to think of first?
The distance isn't as big a problem as it used to be, and that's where, with my internet history, I have fun with that. I like putting those things together for clients. The hardware itself, the whole Mac versus PC thing, again, it's not as big a problem as it used to be. But trying to get on board with the way that companies communicate and sort of the attitudes, the amounts of communication that they have between the management and the employees, and just the expectations of everybody that's trying to get a job done and the information that they need to get that job done. So it's not so much purely communication, but the CRM or ERP systems, trying to merge those things, and the fundamental tools that you use to get the job done. So maybe you've got a specific piece of software that you really need to get that job done, and it's a different flavor than the company you're merging with. Yeah, there's always going to be a little bit of a battle, and you've got to, as a business owner or a manager, you have to sit down, evaluate the tools that are being used in both offices, and make sure that you choose the right one going forward.
More on IT questions with Kevin Ammerman in a moment. Plus, we'll have Carolyn De Luca's one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur. That's next.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:56 on today's entrepreneur. We're joined by Carolyn De Luca of Delfab. We'll have her one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur in a moment. First, Josh, talking about IT with Kevin Ammerman and how you really have to consider the back end and the tech side of the business when you bring companies together.
And then there's not only of course, the software and the hardware, but there's the training. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people that understand one software, one aspect, and don't necessarily understand the other. How much of an importance does that role play, and how do you bridge that gap between the two from a training standpoint?
It's really tricky, and the important thing is to get your employees to remember what the goal is, the end product that you're trying to produce, and not get too hung up on the tools. And this is even day to day, so it's not just during a merger, but even in your day-to-day operations. You got to make sure that your employees, use the best tools that they have at hand, and don't sort of fall into the trap of, I've got to click twice here and then click over here and then do this to get this job done. But take a look at what they're doing and make sure that they're sort of mapping it out.
Is there also a question of, I hate to say it, does size matter? If you're merging two companies that are smaller sizes and going to a bigger one, is that something that companies have to think about, saying, you know what, maybe these softwares that we're using that are good for the smaller companies maybe don't necessarily fit for our larger merged entity?
That can be a good thing or a bad thing. So if both companies are sort of on the same page and both of the newly merged companies have to make that change to grow into a newer software, sometimes that can be a real bonding thing and give you big opportunities to sort of put people in the right positions going forward, rather than being stuck in old traps and trying to just retrain people and shoehorn things together.
And I guess when you're talking about different locations and merging companies, and I know we didn't talk about demerging a lot because it's a lot more about merging, a lot more about consolidation these days than not. How does the cloud help you? Very much. And I don't want to sound like it's so mystical. I mean, most of our information is out there anyways, but how much do the people that, keeping their servers on their own system, but yet merging two companies together, the cloud must benefit them to a great degree.
It's a whole new set of tools. And yeah, it can be kind of convenient if you're sort of merging two in-house companies and then moving them to a cloud-based solution. But where it gets a little bit more fun is if one of the companies, for example, is already on the cloud, trying to do a cloud to cloud move can be sometimes very tricky because the tools to do that just don't exist. You end up having to do it in more of a two-step process. You've got to export it and then re-import it into the cloud rather than do it just directly.
Sounds like so much fun. Anyhow, thanks a lot, Kevin. I know there's a ton to talk about consolidations and mergers and all that. But as we approach our last moment of the show, we'll turn to Carolyn De Luca of Delfab and ask you, Carolyn, what would be your one or two or three pieces of advice for today's entrepreneur?
I would say that if you are an entrepreneur in a business where you see your sales changing in the sector you're currently selling to, definitely think outside the box. Don't be fearful of doing something different what you're currently doing. People think that, you have to be a one-trick pony in order to get the right type of sales and to be able to be focused. You don't want to be everything to everybody, but I disagree. I think you should always have one part of your business that's looking elsewhere so that you're ready for change. And then when that change starts to happen, be patient with it. Don't give up on it if you see it's not working right away, because a little bit of patience pays off in the long run.
Excellent, I think. And Dan, I listen to Carolyn and I say, you know what? She came out of school. She knew that she didn't know everything. She wanted to learn about the business, and she really delved in. She didn't have a chip on her shoulders that some youthful people do these days. I won't mention names or anything, but I think it's great that she has an open mind and learning from the previous generation and taking the best of all worlds. And I think entrepreneurs need to do that continuously, is take the best of all worlds.
Carolyn De Luca of Delfab, thanks very much for joining us this evening on today's Entrepreneur. Thanks as well to Kevin Ammerman and Josh. We're back next Monday night at 7 p.m. here on News Talk Radio, CJAD 800. The Exchange with Lise Ravery is next.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.